Welcome to Haunted Lineage, the crossroads where the paranormal and history meet. I'm your guide, Christopher Overly McDowell. Stay close as we explore chilling encounters, share spine-tingling experiences, haunted legends, eerie submissions from listeners like you, and dive into famous places where spirits may still linger. Here, every ghost has a story, and every story has roots in history. Prepare to be frightened, fascinated, and forever changed, because it's time to turn off the lights, settle in, and explore the shadows of our haunted past. In this second Haunted Lineage podcast episode, I'll dive a bit deeper into my first-hand experiences with the paranormal and examine a haunted location with a ton of history behind it. If you would like your story to have a chance to be featured, you can submit your story on our website or message us on one of our social media platforms. From there, we'll direct you on ways to submit your experience. Now, grab your favorite comfort drink that keeps you warm, because these chilling tales are going to be a bit lengthier than our last episode. My family on both my mother and father's side has been in the United States for many generations. Due to my mother's family history only becoming better understood in recent years, the majority of family research that resulted in historical information was on my father's side before I was born and as I was growing up. My father was always the history buff and family genealogist when I was younger, which resulted in many day trips or short weekend trips that had at least a light theme that touched the past. We can trace our roots here back to both sides of the Civil War and fighting the War for American Independence, which you might know better as the Revolutionary War. The family has a lot of oral tradition, of which some has been confirmed, and other legends seem to be just legends. While in 4th grade, I had an amazing woman as my teacher. She had previously worked in a one-room schoolhouse and before being married had been a nun. While I am not Catholic myself, being in her class would be the closest I ever came to attending a parochial school. She was just the right amount of strict and understanding, and this fostered my creativity and growth while in her class. I struggled with handwriting, so the teacher allowed me to use our word processor to type any reports, and when we had reading time, she wouldn't disturb me if I got engrossed in the book I was reading. This would often cause me to come out of my trance-like state of reading an entire subject or two later. In addition to reading classics such as Old Yeller, I also read a few Goosebumps books that year. It was during this year of 4th grade that my real quest for knowledge began. So I read additional books that most kids wouldn't, such as the entire Webster's Dictionary, and basically the entire Encyclopedia Britannica set we had in the classroom. I skipped the parts about the spiders. If I had to guess, I would say that not having many friends caused me to be bored in class, so learning was my escape. It was that year, during a brief section about local history, that our teacher assigned each of us to write a report about something nearby. Me, knowing that my father was a history buff of sorts, I went to him for ideas. He said he knew just the thing, and after getting some information for the short report I was to write, was told we could go visit the location of the event. This event harkened back to the Civil War here in Missouri, and specifically Northeast Missouri, where I grew up. In case you aren't extremely familiar with or don't recall your studies from school, I'll briefly outline Missouri's atmosphere during the conflict. During the Civil War, Missouri's loyalties were deeply divided. This division was evident even in how different regions referred to the conflict. Southern sympathizers called it the War for Southern Independence, or the War of Northern Aggression, while Northern supporters referred to it as the War of the Rebellion, or the Great Rebellion. the population was split between those advocating for secession, Southern sympathizers, and loyalists who supported the Union. The Northerners were generally referred to as Unionists, Yankees, or Federals, and Southerners were usually referred to as rebels. The terminology used to refer to both people and the war itself hints at the divide the country faced at the time. Common nicknames for the North and South were Billy Yank and Johnny Reb, respectively. Even battles were often given different names by the North and South for the exact same battle. Just how different these views were and how deep the disdain for the opposite side was, though, is part of what we'll examine. By September 12th of 1862, a year and 5 months from April 12th, 1861, the start of the Civil War, it is estimated that between 150,000 to 200,000 troops had been lost on both sides. Soldiers would often ransack a town or area as they went through to inflict damage on the livelihood of those who supported the opposite side. The overall feeling stemming from the state's divided loyalties and the pure gruesomeness of the national tolls of death and destruction up to this point helped craft a perfect storm to bring about the turn of events of the story we're about to explore. This story appears on the surface to be a normal missing persons case, but quickly morphs into something much more involved. The missing man's name was Andrew Alsman, who was a 60-year-old carpenter that identified as a Union patriot in a mostly pro-Confederate area. Palmyra, Missouri during the Civil War was in an area of Missouri known as Little Dixie due to its southern leanings. Andrew Alsman was later described as a highly respected and conscientious man who did his duty by leading Union forces to arrest local Confederate sympathizers by a Union source. Consequently, Alsman was taken prisoner by Colonel Porter's forces when Porter raided Palmyra on September 12, 1862, a date which we earlier referenced as already having more than a combined approximation of 150,000 dead soldiers in the war. After several skirmishes, Colonel Porter decided that Alsman was a liability and ordered his release. Upon regaining his freedom, Alsman was hesitant to leave the Confederate encampment, as there were several men in the regiment that had family members that he had informed on. To ensure his safety, Porter allowed him to choose a detail that would then accompany him to the city limits of Palmyra or the nearest Union lines, his choice. Once the party departed from the camp, Andrew Alsman was never seen again. Speculation and local lore states that he was taken into the woods in northern Marion County, Missouri, or southern Lewis County, Missouri, and shot. This leads us to the part that will eventually cause this to become intertwined with the paranormal. It apparently was noticed in the area that Alsman did not return from the camp, as on October 8th, Provost Marshal William R. Strachan, a former deputy U.S. Marshal in Missouri, acting for Union Colonel John McNeil, published a notice in the local Union newspaper, the Palmyra Courier, to Confederate Colonel Joseph C. Porter. McNeil threatened that unless Alsman was returned within 10 days, 10 of Porter's men, held as prisoners of war in Palmyra and Hannibal, would be executed. It's possible that Porter may never have seen the notice, and most history writers agree that Alsman had already been targeted by personal enemies within Porter's ranks prior to his release and subsequent disappearance. However, the Confederate colonel was unable to return him, whatever the reason may have been. Thus, Alsman's presumed murder was perceived as part of a pattern of extra-legal actions that Porter's enemies viewed as characteristic of his command, tolerated if not encouraged by the rebel leader. True to the published warning from Union Colonel McNeil, on the evening of October 17th, 10 prisoners were selected, 5 from the jail in Hannibal, Missouri, and 5 from the jail in Palmyra. None of the men had been found to have any connection with the disappearance of Alsman. As an example, Willis Baker was in the Palmyra jail because his sons were said to have been riding with Colonel Porter and was also reported to have killed a Union-supporting neighbor in the previous year. All 10 of the selected prisoners were executed on October 18th, 1862 by a firing squad of 30 soldiers from the 2nd Missouri State Militia. Now, you might ask why it took 30 soldiers to shoot 10 men, but the reason is because some would have had blanks, while others would have had live rounds. The reason for this is to help give the soldiers enough doubt if they were the one who killed a prisoner to ease their conscience, and was a common practice in executions performed by firing squad. Even with the executions, Alsman never appeared, and the act of what seemed to be retaliation for his disappearance gained Colonel John McNeil the moniker Butcher of Palmyra. Fast forward almost 133 years to the date that the execution took place, and I find myself accompanying my family on a day trip to the site of what had become known as the Palmyra Massacre. Oddly, the time we visited the site coincided with the same month it happened, and I even have a photo dated by my mother to prove it. It was a pleasantly mild day for it being October in northeast Missouri when we arrived in Palmyra. It wasn't a long trip, as Palmyra was only around a 20-minute drive from our house. My father had done semi-professional photography for years prior to my birth, and was still an avid photographer. As such, he decided to bring along his newest toy, a Polaroid instant camera. As we got out of the car, my dad started talking about the location, which included it previously being the old fairgrounds. It was hard for me to picture a place with such a sad backstory becoming a place where people enjoyed picnics and celebratory events. I walked toward the fence row in the direction in which my father had indicated the sad events had occurred more than a century before. As I got closer to the fence row and looked over what was now no more than a hay-producing pasture, I was told to turn around and smile for the camera. I turned around, stood straight, and put my hands behind my back. I was not told to do this, but it must have been something I felt subconsciously, because it wasn't a normal stance for me. My dad snapped a photo, which we checked to make sure it was going to turn out. Since it did, we went about our day. I then stashed the photo to save to take to school that Monday, and made sure to grab it that morning. I proudly showed my teacher, beaming because I had gone above and beyond for the assignment, and had proof that I had not only learned something, but jumped headfirst into it. I handed the photo to my teacher, and almost as soon as she inspected the photo, she noticed a shadow beside me and said she thought it looked like a soldier standing with a long gun beside him. I looked and said that I didn't remember that shadow being there when we took the photo, and since there wasn't anything there that could have made the shadow, she simply said, "It must be a ghost." The interesting thing is that she said this only about half-jokingly. As soon as I got home from school, I showed my mother, but had to wait until my father was home to show him. We all did not recall the shadow on the ground while there, but largely dismissed it. I put the photo in the desk drawer in my room and didn't look at it for a number of years. The next time I looked at the photo, the shadow was not visible, and so I showed my sister, which she thought was odd. I put it back in the drawer and didn't think about it for a while. A number of years later, while cleaning out my desk, I ran across the photo, and the shadow was back. I then started randomly checking it, and it seemed that every few months or so, the shadow would appear or disappear. No other attributes of the photo seemed to change, not any other shadows, not the contrast or coloration, nothing. I still have the photo today, and luckily, when I went to scan it, it had the mysterious shadow visible. You can check out the photo by reading the article titled Ephemeral Soldier on our website. While my father had always been the family genealogist, he did not realize what I discovered decades later, that we were related to someone from the Confederate regiment that was the target of the Butcher of Palmyra. The 1st Northeast Regiment Missouri Cavalry was a Confederate Army regiment that formed in 1861 under the leadership of Colonel Joseph C. Porter. Even though this regiment does not have an extremely well-documented story, the list includes a number of important battles and events, with the Palmyra Massacre being among them. While I was not able to find out if my ancestral relation, he wasn't a direct line but a cousin, was in Porter's regiment at the time of the massacre, or even perhaps directly involved, I was able to find that Porter's regiment was the regiment that he was part of. The coincidence of the month of the photo being the same month that the execution happened, with the later discovery of the family ties, make me now ask more questions, as the photo no longer seems as likely to be mere coincidence. Is this the spirit of one of the executed prisoners? Is it one of the executioners trying to communicate remorse? If so, are they trying to communicate because of the connection? Or could it even possibly be my ancestor trying to communicate because of the perfectly aligned circumstances? It's unlikely that I'll ever know, but it shows that there is much more to the world around us that we can and can't always see or sense. Today, a subdivision stands on part of the land. Most of the occupants of the homes are completely unaware of the tainted ground just below where they lay their heads at night, forever stained by the blood of men so tragically caught in the middle of this fight that they were executed in retaliation for a single missing person that stoked the fires of unrest that ultimately led to his demise. Don't forget to check out the photo on our website at hauntedlineage.com and share your thoughts with us. Craving more haunted lore and restless echoes from the past? Unlock a deeper layer of Haunted Lineage with echoes and exclusives. Subscribe on Patreon and become a curator, our inner circle of supporters. You'll get access to bonus episodes, exclusive merch, and insider content you won't find anywhere else. Dive deeper, stay longer, keep the legends alive. In keeping with our Civil War theme on this episode of Haunted Lineage, we'll examine a place that has a cluster of submissions on our website. Our story takes us to Lexington, but probably not the Lexington you're thinking of. No, this is Lexington, Missouri. Nestled on the banks of the Missouri River, in fact, it's less than an hour from where I live and am recording this episode. This small, slow-moving town was incorporated in 1845. There really hasn't been much change since that time, but in the 1840s, it was quite a bustling city, full of commerce and promise. At the start of the Civil War, it is listed as having 4,122 residents, while today it is home to almost 4,600 people. A modest increase in residents, with many nostalgic nods to the past, including more than a handful of antique stores. Taking in the sights of Missouri Highway 224, or Main Street once it comes into town, you will find a small, made-right restaurant that only takes cash, that functions mostly as a drive-in, and across the street in both directions, you will see either signs talking about the area's history, or a memorial. The memorial incorporates two of Lexington's claims to fame, one being the Civil War, showcased in the Lexington Historical Museum, and the other being the former Wentworth Military Academy, showcased in the Wentworth Military Academy Museum. The Civil War was not kind to Lexington, and the First Battle of Lexington left a permanent mark, referred to as the Battle of the Hemp Bales due to the tactic the Confederates used to advance toward their enemy by using waterlogged hemp bales as moving armor. The Union forces had come to Lexington by way of the steamboat White Cloud from Boonville, and was comprised mainly of Germans from St. Louis. Upon the arrival of the 5th Regiment of the United States Reserve Corps, with a goal to occupy Lexington, Colonel Charles G. Stifel selected the defunct Masonic College in Lexington as his headquarters, and directed the soldiers to begin fortifying the position. They then set about procuring as many armaments as they could from the local area, mainly through confiscation. Records show approximately 200 kegs of gunpowder, 33 muskets, and 2 6-pounder cannons were secured by Union forces. Around mid-August, the 90-day enlistments Stifel had received from St. Louis were expiring, so they were ordered to return back to St. Louis. This left the several pro-Union Home Guard companies that had been raised and placed under the command of Major Frederick W. Becker. The southern-leaning Colonel Henry L. Rout of Clay County enlisted approximately 1,000 men during this time. He used these forces to arrest several prominent Union-supporting men, including the former Missouri Governor Austin A. King, and surrounded the federal outpost that had been formed at the former Masonic College. Rout demanded that Becker surrender. This was met with refusal and some antagonization. It was heard that the 1st Illinois Cavalry was en route to Lexington, so Rout withdrew his men from the area. During this, the pro-Confederate Missouri State Guard, under control of Major General Sterling Price, marched toward the Missouri-Kansas border with approximately 7,000 men to repel Lane's pro-Union Kansas Brigade. After dealing with Lane's forces, the Confederates focused their sights on wresting control of the Missouri River from the Union and encountered Rout and his men at Index, Missouri. There, they joined forces and marched toward Lexington. Meanwhile, on September 4th, federal reinforcements arrived in Lexington with the goal of preventing the exiled secessionist governor of Missouri, Claiborne Fox Jackson, from obtaining any funds from local banks. They did this by impounding the funds of the local banks. This effort extended all the way to Warrensburg. Upon arriving in Warrensburg, the Union forces found themselves in Price's path and made a hasty retreat back to Lexington. Later, on September 10th, Colonel James A. Mulligan arrived with his 23rd Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment, aka the Irish Brigade, along with a detachment of the 27th Missouri Mounted Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin W. Grover, and took control of the Union forces. Additional reinforcements arrived, which eventually gave the Union 3,500 men. Price arrived with an army that now numbered approximately 15,000 men in Lexington on September 11, 1861, and after resting for the night, started a skirmish on the morning of September 12th, when 2 federal companies posted behind hemp shocks along a hill opposed Price's cavalry advance. Price pulled back for a few miles, but continued to advance once his artillery and infantry arrived that afternoon. All in all, the fighting would continue for days, with the Masonic College, Anderson House, which was used as a hospital, and changed hands between North and South throughout the battle, was hit by cannonball and gunfire, and the courthouse was hit with a cannonball that is now mounted in the indentation it created in the front column even to this very day. Yet, even with the massive 15,000 Confederate troops and way outnumbered 3,500 Union troops, the official number of casualties was fewer than 200 combined. The Missouri State Guard secured the victory for the Confederacy in Lexington and forced the surrendered Union troops to listen to a speech by the deposed pro-Confederate Missouri Governor Jackson. There was a subsequent exchange of prisoners, with some record-keeping issues, which resulted in some later being executed at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. There are many stories of hauntings that come from Lexington, Missouri, with the best documented and explored being from Anderson House, which is now a Missouri State Historic Site and Museum. To keep the authenticity of the location, you can still see bullet holes in the plaster inside the house from where the conflict scarred it over a century ago. But that isn't the most interesting part. The history and atmosphere are fascinating, but they merely lend themselves to the stories told about the place. It is said that people have feelings of being watched, hear voices, capture EVPs, and there are even a few photos on the web. One of the most common reports are of hearing a woman's singing or other disembodied voices. Before it was a museum, the family that lived in the home reported a woman's ghostly apparition that would appear outside of a particular window each night at the stroke of midnight. To try to get the ghostly appearances to stop, they bricked up the window. This seemingly worked, as she was never reported to have been seen again, even though the window has since been restored to normal. Other people have reported apparitions on the adjacent park and battlefield where the soldiers would have lost their lives. One report happened while some Civil War reenactors were staying the night in the Anderson house. A large, old-fashioned piece of lumber that was used to lock a door lifted up and out of its brackets and was tossed across the room. Even tour guides have decided they not only feel creeped out by the property at night, but at least one reported that she would no longer go up to the third floor because once she was walking down the steps, she felt as though someone tried to push her down them. These are not the only stories of experiences people report regarding the Oliver Anderson house in Lexington, Missouri. One online account states that when the writer was 11 years old, their aunt took them to visit the Anderson house. They found the tour fascinating and felt very comfortable in the house, not wanting to leave. After they got home and went to sleep later that night, they woke up feeling like someone was staring at them. Looking at the bedroom door, they saw a man in a Confederate uniform leaning on the doorframe, just watching them. They recall it being scary, but not feeling that it was threatening. Their cousin called for their aunt, and before she arrived, the man disappeared. As real as it felt, they are unsure if it really happened, or was their imagination due to the tour earlier that day. They also mentioned being curious and wanting to return to see if they experience anything else. Even now, over 150 years after the battle took place, you can still see where it made its mark on the landscape. There are visible entrenchments still on the site of the battlefield and even on the property of the Anderson house. These earthworks were hand-dug by the men who fought, and inevitably some of those same men died with their blood spilling on that piece of land. Inside the house, used as a hospital before, during, and after the battle, the bullet holes still allude to the echoes of flying bullets. With all the shared experiences, photos, and even EVPs shared at various places online, it is hard to think that there isn't at least something paranormal happening at the Anderson house and the adjacent battlefield. Are there really spirits of soldiers roaming the Lexington battlefield and neighborhood? Who is singing in the Anderson house, or who was the woman screaming outside the window at midnight? Will these spirits ever rest? There are so many questions we can pose, and many, if most, may never have an outright answer. Feel free to share your thoughts on our social media or through our contact form, as we'd love to know what you think. As we wrap up this episode, it's clear that Lexington, Missouri holds more secrets than we could uncover in one sitting. But don't worry, next time we'll continue to explore the depths of the paranormal there. You won't want to miss what we'll examine, so stay tuned. History has its ghosts, and we're here to find them. And that concludes this episode of Haunted Lineage. The support of our curators on Patreon makes this all possible. Join today and get exclusive access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and more. Had a paranormal encounter? Share it with us at hauntedlineage.com. You can find us on Facebook, Mastodon, and Blue Sky. Just search Haunted Lineage. Together, we'll continue to examine where the crossroads of the paranormal and history meet. We never know what the echoes of the past will have in store for us next. Until next time, stay curious and keep the lights on.